make a psak on absolute trait.
Tarfus.
Huh?
I restarted the video just for you. Okay, here we go. We're starting a new Mishnah, Baruch Hashem. Tonight we are learning, I'm on the wrong page. Tonight we are learning Maseches Eruvin, Daf Nun Ches. And we're starting at the bottom of Nun Zayin and Beis at a new Mishnah. And this Mishnah will take us through to the next Mishnah on the bottom of Nun Ches and Beis, all about measuring. And what we're going to be discussing is some of the details of how do we measure the landscape of the 2,000 amos from the edge of our city. Now, remember, edge of our city has new parameters based on yesterday's learning, which is that we give 70 vishirayim outside of a city, Lenoi, as we pointed out. Here we're starting to measure our 2,000 amos. So how do we do all of this measuring? So it says the Gemara, very interestingly, a modedin, the Mishnah, bottom of Nun Zayin and Beis, 4 lines from the bottom, a modedin el bechevel shel nun amma. Everyone, uniformity, everyone can only use a rope that is 50 amma exactly. You cannot use a 100 amma rope, and you can't use a 20 amma rope, 50 only. Lo pachos velo yoser. Velo yimdod ella keneged libo. When you're holding one end of the rope, you hold it at your heart. Here too, because of uniformity. And in fact, the Ritva and other Rishonim debate, what about laying it on the ground? Is that better or is that worse? Well, it depends on the topography of what you're talking about. If it's mamish flat, Chicago, right? So like you're pretty good unless you're like at Mount Trashmore. We're going to discuss what to do at the Mount Trashmores today, depending on the elevation. If it breaks the threshold of a certain angle, then we change gears. But here the Mishnah writes that the standard is to hold it by your heart. If you are standing at the edge of a dip or a valley or some kind of relatively low fence, mavlio, we swallow it up. Mavlio basically means we just hold the rope and we pretend like what's in front of us doesn't matter. So, l'dugma, let's say that you had a little ditch in the ground. Do you measure the curvature of the ditch? Do you lay the rope down to eat up the footage of the 2,000? So we say no, mavlio. We just stretch it over the little ditch in the ground. That's exactly the point of why there's some Rishonim hold. You have to hold it opposite your heart because we don't want to deal with all the little nooks and crannies. That's not we don't want to deal with that. So mavlio. The choser lemidaso. You also have to go back to your measurement. This line is a little confusing. We're going to see later in the Gemara what this phrase v'choser lemidaso means. Let's move on to the next section and we'll get back to this part of the Mishnah later. Higia lahar. If you get to a mountain, we'll assume for now one that's not too big, then mavlio, then as well you swallow it up. We'll have to see how you swallow it up. That means that you can hold the rope above it. Okay, fine, Baruch Hashem. What if it's a 50-foot tall mountain? Do we then measure like we lay out the rope and then you lose the elevation and the decline, even though on the horizon front it's much shorter? But how do we do the measurements? And also here as well, the choser lemidaso, we'll see later what this means as well. It's going to be the same for both cases about the case of choser lemidaso by the guy and the gader, and as well for the case of a har. Ubilvad shelo yetze chutz l'tchum. However, when you are moving out of the way to get around something, you cannot stand in a space which is obviously outside your tchum. Now, this is a little bit of a strange caveat because we haven't measured our tchum yet. That's right. What we're doing. That's what we're doing. So the Gemara here, the Mishnah here is under an assumption that you can't do something that's like blaringly obvious, like middle of the desert-esque. So let's say I have a huge mountain in front of me, and let's assume for the moment I'm allowed to move to the side. Okay, so I'll move to the side so that I don't have to go, the mountain ends at like it has a break-off cliff right here. But that break-off cliff is 5,000, it's pashut that it's outside of what will be mine. So then that's not allowed, says the Mishnah. And the Mishnah continues, if you're not able to do havla, if you're not able to just measure, basically ignoring what you see in front of you, that we dig into the mountains. You know, like in Eretz Yisrael, here in America too, there are a few places where they literally dig a tunnel into a mountain. No one's doing that to measure a tchum. So how do we do that? So we'll see later today what that means. But in short, we basically measure Dalit Amos. I'll stand, you'll climb the mountain a little bit and hold it at your feet, and I'll hold it over here. And that way, because it's level to the ground, it's parallel to the ground, you haven't lost any space in elevation. So it's only Dalit Amos. And then he raises it up to his head, and I go back up around him, and then I hold it at my feet. And we keep doing that until we get to the top of the mountain and work our way back down. And then we only have basically the parallel to the ground version of the mountain. That way you don't have to factor in any of the elevation.
How does that work with the 50-hour rope though?
Beautiful. The Gemara answers that question. The Gemara says that there we use a dalet amos rope. Exactly. Of course you have to, because what slope are you talking about? If you can go 50 amos at my head to your toes, you're not on a mountain. Yeah, that's not that's a very low angle. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a case where the dalet amos is worthwhile. Now, if the slope is even greater than that, steeper, that's actually the case of the Mishnah B'chozer L'Midah, where you move off to the side and kind of work your way around. So let's get to that later. We're jumping ahead here. Let's see. So that's what the Mishnah says in the name of Rav Meir, where we're Mekadron again. That's measuring in parallel as we climb the mountain in order not to lose 2,000 amos with the elevation of the mountain. The Gemara opens, Minahani Mili. How do we know that it's a 50 amos rope? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rabda, Amar Akra, because the pasuk says, Orach echatzer mea be'ama v'rochav chamishim b'chamishim. The pasuk says that the length of the chatzer is 100 amos with a width of 50, referencing the Beis Hamikdash. And it says chamishim b'chamishim, 50 and 50. Amra Torah, bechevel shel chamishim ama medod. We should be measuring with 50 amos, says the Gemara. But that pasuk's already been used. Hi, that pasuk of chamishim b'chamishim, miboile litol chamishim u'lesabev chamishim. This is actually a little bit of a remiss to the pasuk we saw a couple of days ago, which is how we define a karpef. Remember, we spoke about when you have a perfect square of 50 by 50 or any number, so the angle, the hypotenuse of that square is going to be times 1.4. And if you take that 50 and multiply times 1.4, it ends up being a karpef of 70 v'shirayim. That's exactly how we make this measurement. So here the pasuk was already used to teach us about a karpef. So how can you now say that the pasuk is used to tell me about the rope? Says the Gemara, im kain, if what you're saying is that the pasuk was only to be used for that and not for a rope, then lemakra chamishim chamishim. Why does the pasuk say my chamishim be chamishim? Why the extra bays? That extra bays is what comes to teach us that the rope has to be 50 shamas minotarte. We learn two things from the pasuk. The chamishim teaches me how to measure a karpef, because if I have a 50 by 50 square, then the hypotenuse is going to be 70 v'shirayim, which is the shear of a karpef. And we can also learn out that the rope for measuring tchumen is going to be 50 amos because of the extra base, chamishim b'chamishim. We didn't need the letter base to teach us the other din. Therefore, tarte, we can learn two different things from here. Therefore, we know the rope has to be 50. Tana lo pachos mipnei shemar v'lo yos mipnei shemamai. Our Mishnah indicates that you cannot have less than 50 amos of a rope, mipnei shemar, because less than 50 amos of a rope will end up giving you a longer distance. Why? Because there's less tension on the line. So you ever look up at the ropes that are holding like the electrical, right? So there's like or those, yes, of course. So like you see like a serious sag. So there's a chachma to that. How much weight can the poles hold? How much tension? What's the grip on each end? So here, a real cheshbon, we're talking small percentages of deviation here. So if I have a 20-foot rope, a 20 amma rope, and I lean back and you lean back, it'll be pretty taut. 50 amos, there's going to be a definite sag. 100 amos, huge sag. That means that's too much. On the other direction, that's the second line here, where the two dots a quarter of the way down. If the rope is shorter, you'll end up having more than 2,000 amos because the rope will be more taut. And below yoser, if it's greater than that, then there'll be too much of a sag, and therefore and that will limit how long your distance is, and that's also not good. We don't want to be too strict, and we don't want to be too lenient.
Is this? Remember a few blocks ago we spoke about, person steps a couple of feet outside, it's so good because they shortened up the tchum.
A Mishnah, yeah,
right.
Mishnah at the end of the previous parak that we gave an extra 15 amos.
Right, so maybe this is where it comes from, because otherwise you should say you could use a 10 amma rope, let it be 100% taut. Who cares? 2,000 amos, 2,000 amos. But here, every 50 amos, they're, let's say, losing an amma, let's call it, right? So maybe
we actually, in theory, could test it because we know what kind of rope they use. We're going to analyze that today because we know exactly what kind of rope they use. And then you could just literally go to Home Depot and test it and see what the difference would have been. But it might be more significant than 15 amos over 2,000. If you have a 50-foot rope, let's just take your example. If you have a 50-foot rope and your deviation, your error is 1 amma, well, you're doing 40 times 50 to get to 2,000.
Right.
So now you're 40 amos off the mark. So your 15 amos wouldn't help you for a 1 amma deviation. We have to see what
you'd be better though, meaning you could technically walk 40 amos outside and still be within 2,000.
If the rope is more taut?
The rope sags.
Correct. No, if the rope doesn't sag.
No, if the rope sags, and really you have another 40 amos to go.
Yeah. So you're saying if the rope was longer than 50 amos, you'd be better.
I'm saying if the rope was shorter, then 2,000 is dead on the nose. 2,000. You can't take a step over that. If you use
but the halacha assumes we assume the tension of whatever weight is on a 50 amma rope. That is the 2,000.
That's not the source of the 50 amos, though.
What?
That's not the source.
15 amos was just to cover us. That's not because, I don't think that it's mathematical to this. We decided, Chachamim decided, it's all the Rabbanim. These are some of the rayas that it's all the
We're not
Rabbanim.
saying, here's a 50 on the rope, but we know it sags 2 on.
That is what we're saying.
And then, so we only count 48?
No, we count 50.
We count 50.
That 50 is what we mean by 50.
But if you use the ruler, the rope.
It's like a handicap in golf, Like we know you're not a good golfer, so we're gonna pad the books a little bit, right? What?
Yeah, that.
I've never. We should go golfing one day. That would be great. Yeah. So I don't. My assumption is like David, that the Mishnah that gives an extra 15 is just to be safe, because measuring is an imperfect science, and we just need to make sure that we don't violate any isurim. And the way that we measure in a reasonable, balanced way is this 50 amma, which with the tension in the line, whatever the slack in the line is going to be. Yeah. So that brings us to about 10, 11, 12 lines down. Amar Ravasi, ein modin in el bechevel shel apaskima. We can only use a rope of a certain material, and that is going to be the rope of apaskima. We have no idea what that is. My apaskima. Amar Rabbi Abba nargila. Thank you very much. Another material that we don't know about. We actually do know what it is, because the Meforshim will explain it momentarily. My nargila. What is that material? Amar Rabbi Yaakov dikla dechad nivra. This is like a type of growth, or like a vine that grows around a tree, that grows around a palm tree, and that is the standard usage, right? So it's not something that weighs like 100 pounds, It's not like it's actually, I'm saying, but you can put a reasonable tension on it. We'll see in a few minutes how that will be a big problem. Says the Gemara, Ika de Amre. Some say no. Maya paskima, Rav Abba Omar nargila, and arguing, not defining, but arguing. Rav Yaakov Omar dikla dechad navra. One says that the definition of apaskima is nargila, which is the bark of a tree. It's like a peel of a bark of a tree. And Rabbi Yaakov argues. That's somehow just, we don't know exactly what the material is, but it's one of the two. It's either the bark of a tree or the vine of a tree, one of the two. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Ein lecha shiyaf in the medida yoser mishal shalos shel barzel. We really should have used something that's solid metal. That's really what we said. Some of Meforshim here don't think it means a chain, but mamash a bar, so that you have exactly 50 amos, like a yardstick, like we would just the equivalent of a yardstick. Don't know. It's the intention of rather than the language of. But there are some Meforshim who say that what kind of argument is that? Because all that does is make the rope sag more. It's so dense. It doesn't work.
It also doesn't stretch.
I mean, you'll never get 50. That's for sure.
Not at 50 ounces, right?
Right.
But if you're going to expect 2 people to hold it up at the chest level,
It'll literally be hanging on the ground.
It's going to be won't hang, but you can't hold it.
Can't hold it. It's huge. That's hundreds of pounds. It's not possible. So that's another reason why. I mean, that plays into this other sheets in the Meforshim, that really we're talking about a 50 amma bar, which you can put it on your shoulder, still heavy, but basically something flat, something that's a real 50 amos. Maybe that's really what's happening here, is that the 50 amos of sagging is not 50 amos, it's 45 amos, whatever it is. It's not really the right number. So then says the Gemara, the punchline. Aval, manaseh, what should we do? Shahare amra Torah v'yado chevel midah. This is a couple of interesting hours here. First of all, it says amra Torah, yet the pasuk is from Zechariah. That's not Torah, so we're playing that it's Torah. Which indicates already, again, for the 10th time, the Tchumen are D'Rabbanan, right? Because we see a Mar Makom that's being called Torah, quote unquote. Even though normally we say Divrei Torah and Divrei Kabbalah lo Yalfinam, we distinguish sharply between that which is the 5 books of Moses and that which is everything else, the other 19 books of Tanakh, of Nach, I should say. But nevertheless, here the Gemara does refer to it as Torah, just an interesting Gemara. Says the Gemara, wait a minute, you're over there in that case, in that pasuk is talking about, is in Yechezkel, is referring by using reeds as a measure. So how does that work? Says the Gemara, Ahu letare. Rashi highlights that's she'arim, tough and shin in Aramaic are interchangeable. Share. The word doesn't seem to be spelled right as it relates to our language, but Rashi is very clear here that it's talking about. I kind of want to speak to Rashi. Where is it? Right here, below us, an inch limdod rochav hashe'arim. Okay, so he says that kana was only being used for doors, a much smaller distance, and there the kana would have been appropriate. But here we're going to use our measure of either the nargila, according to the shita of Rabbi Abba, or the dikla dechad navra, the vine that grows at the base of a palm tree. One of those should work out. Tani Rebbe Yosef, Shlosha Chavalim Hein. There are three types of ropes that we use in halacha. Shel Megeg, which is of a reed. No.
Yeah.
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 So maybe we'll para.
Yeah, Shel Megeg. Oh, that's the next line. Yeah, Shel Megeg, Shel Netzer, Shel Pishtan. Let's see how all three of these play out. Shel Megeg lepara. When do we use the reed? We use that for the para aduma. Ditnan. The Mishnah writes, Kavtua bechevel hamegeg v'nosnu al gavi ma'arachasa. That when we are tying up the para aduma, we do so with this kanen, with this reed. V'nosnu al gavi ma'arachasa. That when we are laying it down for shchita, that we use this as well to hold it. Shel nitzarim lesota. We use nitzarim. This is also some type of arava klufa. It's the peel of a willow tree, Rashi points out. And there, shel nitzarim l'sota. Ditnan, what does the Mishnah write by a sota? V'achar kach maybe chevel hamitzri. Chevel hamitzri, the Meforshim point out, is the same as shel nitzarim. It's the same material of the willow bark. The kosher l'malami dadeha, when her clothes are being removed, she still needs to remain modest. The fact that she's going through whatever she's going through doesn't mean that other people are allowed to see her dressed inappropriately, and we have to keep her covered. So there was a rope that was used to make sure that she remained covered, and shel pished on the medida. And the flax, which is what we are talking about, seemingly the flax is an equivalent here, is the medida, is for our measuring purposes. And that is the three uses for ropes in halacha at this juncture, at least. 2/3 of the way down. Next part of the Mishnah, hayamoded v'higia. So then the Gemara says this, the Mishnah says this line, midatani chozer l'midasa, that you go back to where you were measuring. What's pshat? What does it mean that you're going back to where you're measuring? I was merames to this already. Michlal. Let's say you're standing in front of a cliff. You can't do havla by a cliff. You can't. There's no way to do havla. There's no huge mountain in front of you and it's straight up. So then what do? You move to the side. You go over to the side where you're able to do havla, where you're able to extend a 50 amma rope. So let's say that this thing is the stender in front of me is 100 feet high, but right next to me it's not 100 feet high, and I can stretch the good. Then move over, do what you need to do, but then come back to the line that you started at. That's what b'chozer l'midaso means. That's what the Gemara says here, 2/3 of the way down. But the Gemara is a little bothered by that. But before we get there, it says, did I finish this? Yes. It says Gemara Tanina lahadetana rabbanan. We already learned this. If you get up to a place where there's some cutouts in the ground, if you can throw the rope across the small little gap in the ground, we don't want to measure every curve. We don't want to measure every ditch. So good, then measure it. However, if you're not able to do that, then move over. So same exact idea. Just move over if you're able to do it. If you have a very curvy, wavy type of space that is a depression in the ground. So here says the Gemara, maktir ve'oleh, maktir ve'yored. This is the idea that we learned from Rabbi Meir at the top, at the end of our Mishnah, which is this idea of being maktir, of cutting through. How do we cut through? We don't actually cut through. We just do the math as though it's just measuring in 4 amma stretches. So we'll learn a little bit more about that in a minute. But says the Gemara, hold on one second. Higia l'kosel. If you get to a wall, ein omrim yikov hakosel. If you get to a wall, we don't measure a wall. That way, a very tall wall. We're not maktir. We don't do that. Why not? Ela om dova holichlo. We approximate what the thickness of the wall would be. The Meforshim here explain the ideal way to measure is that if you have a wall like this, so what you do is you put a pole on this side, and then you put a pole on this side, and you run a string between them and measure it. Just a very practical, or you could measure the thickness of the wall if you have direct access. But let's say you have the Great Wall of China, where you're not getting to the end of the Great Wall of China. So you'll build a pole on one side and a pole on the other, and you'll measure the distance. Now nowadays, halacha l'maisa, when there is a measuring of a tchum, which is somewhat rare, we now use digital forms, lasers, whatever. We can get all the way down to the appropriate place. I don't know if they factor in the Mishnah that you referenced, whoever both of you referenced about the extra 15 amos that we learned about 10 blot ago. I don't know, but I do know that we don't rely on this method anymore of the 50 amos because it's unnecessary. We have such good technology.
It depends on the reason. Yeah, I keep.
What do you mean?
My feeling is that they're specifically using a rope that slacks in the middle to get those extra amos cushion at the end.
But
so therefore a digital laser.
But clearly the halacha doesn't. So far, it doesn't seem that we look at the resulting 2,000 amos in a lenient way, other than the 15 granted amos that we got earlier.
No, but the mission is very specific. 50 amma rope, right?
Yeah.
Has to be no more, no less.
And the same material, so there's uniformity in the measuring.
For a certain material, so the question is one. And
But that aval ma'anaseh, that was what the quote was from Zechariah, which is the Chachamim said, we're going to be lenient here. This is how we're going to do it.
which part?
I heard you saying if you wanted precision, you wouldn't use 50. I think that's what you're saying.
We don't need-
You
we
would
don't
use
need-
4 ounces.
Right, yeah,
If you want precision,
If you want precision, you'd use the metal bar. You'd use if you want precision, you'll use a laser. You'll use a metal bar. You literally just flip it up over and over and over again. You
Right.
keep counting, and then you're
or,
done.
or right, that's actually a good example of a 4-ounce metal bar or something like that.
Yeah,
But if
those-
50
we had that in
on the road-
Hilchos Shabbos. Is that considered carrying on Shabbos?
Comes out that there is not a requirement for precision.
Correct. It's
Right.
because it's all derabbanan. We'll see soon that this doesn't work everywhere. It doesn't work by Dina D'Oraisa. This
It just
only
sounds
works
like
here.
you're ruining it by getting too.
You're not ruining it. It's all the inaccuracies here are intentional. We don't use,
Exactly, so then leave them.
but we
Why do
still
we-
call it 2,000 amos when we're done.
Right, because we take a rope, right, and we measure, we pull it 50,
Correct.
and really it's 48, let's say,
Correct.
right, I'm 48.
Which
ounces
means
away
that
from you.
after your 40 rotations of 50, you're down, let's say, 80 amos.
80 ounces.
So you're
right?
at you're
But
at
I'm
19,
marking-
20,
I'm banging a stake in the ground and saying this is 2,000 ounces from the city, right?
and you are. So the Chachamim call that 2,000 amos
Right, so why did they do that? Because for some reason,
because we're makil by Eruvin.
really, we should really go another 40 ounces,
Right. 80
Right.
amos. Yeah.
80 ounces, but we're not,
No, but we're not making.
We're not doing
It comes out closer this way.
it really comes out of the summer, right? Because either you only went.
Well, the question is, I think this gets into, we have to see what some of the Rishonim say here, which is,
The question is why?
Question is why?
What were they trying to benefit? What's the benefit of saying 50 on the road? We know
Yeah.
we're losing.
At 4 ounces at a time. is very common.
Okay, but say something
that's not a bad svar.
Right, but a
Not
lot
a
of
bad
things are cumbersome.
it was his
Yeah, a
Lopakos
lot of
Scoliosis.
things are
Right.
awesome. Right.
Megillah.
What?
Megillah.
What do you mean, the Megillah?
The days.
The days.
Oh, Lo Pachos V'Yoser, you mean the days in which we read, the Mishnah there, yeah. Lo Pachos V'Yoser,
Yeah, but that's different for different reasons. That's because it
It's
can't
not
get,
him, it's still plural.
it can get more or less.
Just repeat the question for those of you who are out here in Zoom land in case you can't hear. Why is it that the Chachamim set up a system of exactly 50 amos when it is by its nature inaccurate? Because 50 amos will sag a little bit for sure by its weight, just gravity, whatever the material is. Even if you have twine, even thread, it would sag. I mean, that would be easy to work with, but still there's a sag. It's
Are
something.
you pulling it?
You're pulling it, but still,
Try to pull a
there's-
rope straight.
it's impossible.
You can't pull it-
And
you can't
especially
pull it-
here, you're talking about a weighty
Also
rope. So the
changing-
question that they're asking is, why is it that the Chachamim did it this way? So a little, I'm still falling back to this line we saw in the middle of Nun Ches Amud Aleph, that really it should have been that perfect measurement of shalshalos. It should have been perfect. That's how we have to do it with a rope. But then you're saying that that's a chumrah, not a kula. It's a chumrah because you end up hitting your 2,000 amos at what's really 1920.
It's
a rope.
whatever the kind is. It's not-
Whatever the result
Yeah.
is, I'm approximating it based on Hirsch's numbers.
You're losing because of the set.
Correct. Though at the same time, they made a rule that you also can't do a longer rope.
Right, but they wanted
to protect you
precision,
from
they
doing-
should have said do it 10 on rope.
The whole question is
More
why
accurate.
50?
Yeah, 150.
And then I'm saying that, I don't know where.
No, the 50's from a hold on, the 50's from a drasha. We know where the 50's from. The 50's from a drasha. The question is, why is it not a bar? Why is it rope? We know where the 50's from.
But also, you're taking a 50 where they
Because
measured
it's
150 run. It was 100 by 50 was one time. They
Correct.
measured 50 here. Over 2,000 amas, we're losing.
Correct. But no, but we have a pasuk that we're basing ourselves on. We know based on the pasuk on the top of Nun Ches Amud Aleph, that was Rabbi Yehuda Marav. The reason why we have 50 amos, it's not a barter for us. We're not choosing it per se. It is an asmachta because it's a pasuk in the Torah, but this is the Rabbi. And the Rishonim here point out that this is an asmachta and not a din doraisa, that we picked the number 50 from here, and that we pick a specific rope. It's based on specific. Yeah. That's where we got the number 50 from. The question is, why wouldn't we use something more
We also
exacting
have
still?
hundreds of other measurements.
So here's the combo deal. We have two psukim that are forcing our hands, and then we'll have to continue because I want to make sure everyone makes mar. The two things that are compromising us is that number one is we have a pasuk that forces us to have a rope, to have 50, and the second thing is the pasuk in Zechariah that forces us to have a rope. So you have two psukim that are forcing our hands here. So it's not so much that the Chachamim sat around and said, how should we do this? The Chachamim looked into Tanakh and they said, where is the Torah leading us? And they looked in the pasuk of Chamishim, the Chamishim, they said there's an extra letter base. And from there we learned that it's supposed to be Chamishim. And then we looked at the pasuk in Zechariah and said, we should have used Shal Shalos. Aval Mana said, the pasuk says in Zechariah, you have to use a rope.
So the bottom line.
That's the answer. It's from
drushes.
drushes.
One way or the other.
That's a good question.
Right. How
That's
do
a
you use
good
a
question.
meter? If all these particulars say you need a 50 on the road.
I will do some research tonight. I will do some research tonight, Mir Sasha. Sometime between midnight and 7 a.m. We're on the top. Are we on the top of the next page? No, we're at the bottom of this page. Okay, so then says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Higia lekosel ein omrim yikova kosel. We don't do this with a wall. Ela omdo v'holechlo. We make an approximation. So asks the Gemara, I don't understand. V'ha'anantnan mavlio v'chozer lemidaso. Why don't you? We said by a mountain that you move off to the side. If you have a big wall in front of you, move off to the side and measure. What's with the approximation? Says the Gemara, hasam over there, not the wall. The other cases where there's a mountain where you're in theory able to walk over it, and we say you're therefore mavliya. Hasam nicha tashmishta. That's convenient. It's not so hard to walk over a small mountain. Big deal. So you walk over a small mountain. So there we say havla. However, hacha lo nicha tashmishta. Here by a wall, nobody walks through or over walls. It's not normal. So there we made a kula that you can be omeid, that you can approximate. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Let's get into the more sophisticated parts of tonight. Lo shanu ella she'ein chut hamishkoles yored kenegdo. Chut hamishkoles is like when they put in my basketball court in my backyard, they use a plumb line. You know, these like lines that have a very heavy weight. And when they actually stop moving, it is perfectly straight. So that's how they measure things. Good. So that's what's happening here. A person is the measurer, the person who's measuring the tchum. So he takes the plumb line and he wants to see like how far down does the pit go. So lo shanu, when do we say that you are koder? That you're kodrin, what was the language from 4 lines up? Maktir va'olem, maktir va'yored in a pit. We only said that she'ein chut hamishkoles yored kenegdo, when the string doesn't get to hang all the way down because it's blocked by a slope. There's more slope, so the plumb line gets stopped. In that case, where there's a slope that's enough to stop the plumb line, then we say maktir va'olem, maktir va'yored. Then we use the 4 amma stretches, right? That's parallel to the flat of the earth. That's when the she'ein chut hamishkoles yored kenegdo. Turning to the top of Nun Ches Amud Beis, aval chut hamishkoles yored kenegdo. If in fact the plumb line can go directly down uninterrupted, then modedo medida yafeh. Then what we do is we just simply measure the floor at the bottom of the pit, because that means that the wall is very straight. And because the wall is very straight, so therefore we just measure what's on the pit. That's the Medida Yafeh. The Rashi here highlights that as well. The Kama Omko Shel Gai. How deep can this pit be? Amar Rav Yosef Alpayim. It can be 2,000 amos. 2,000, that's a lot. Abaye says, wait a minute. We have a Mari Makom that says otherwise. Amok Kuf Verochav Nun Mavlio. That it can only be 100 wide and only 50 deep. Where did you get 2,000 from? V'im lav ein mavlio. You can't do havla. You can't do anything if it's going to be more than 50 deep. So says the Gemara, that shita that Abaye quoted as a question, hudamar ke'acherim. That's the shita of acherim. The tanya acherim omer mafilu omek alpayim v'rochav gimel mavlio. Sorry, our Gemara is like acherim, and this other case is not like acherim because we said that it can be 2,000. Ika de Amre, some say that there was another version of Rav Yosef, which is a little bit more difficult to understand. Amar Rav Yosef, afilu yeser me alpayim. Even if it's a much larger hole, you can do it. Even if it's more than 2,000 amos, says the Gemara, Kiman, that's like nobody. It's not like the 2,000 that we saw, and it's not like the 50 that we saw in the other shita. So where did we get 2,000 plus from? We only saw 2,000 and we saw 50. Says the Gemara, Hasam, where's the machlokas about the larger shear? Hasam she'ein chut hamashkoles yored. That's only when ein chut hamashkoles yored, where the plumb line doesn't actually end up going down. There we say that you're allowed to be maktir v'olem maktir v'yored. There we have our machlokas. But hacha over here, the chut hamashkoles yored kenegdo. In that case, we only allow for it to be 50 deep. Ein chut hamashkoles yored kenegdo ad kama. How do we do the measuring? Amar Avimi Dalit. What we do is we have a pole that holds out the plumb line Dalit Amos from where we are over the looming pit. What?
That was my question. How do you get from where you're standing?
Yes. So you're standing at the edge and you're holding a pole that is Dalit Amos, a fishing rod, perfect, and you put a plumb line at the end and then you let it fall. So it says the Gemara V'chein Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel Dalit. Higia, we're 2/3 of the way down on Ches Amud Beis. Higia lahar Mavlio v'chozer l'midah. So we said that in regards to a mountain, that you're mavliya, and if the mountain's too big, you move to the side. Amar Rava Loshanu, what are the parameters here? Loshanu el bahar hamislaket yud mitoch dalid. When do we say this Mishnah? That's only true when the elevation goes up 10 tfachim over the short distance of dalid amos. Aval, if the slope is slightly lower than that, so it's going to be 10 tfachim over dalid amos. But if it's 10 tfachim over 5 amos, which is a slightly lower angle, that's our next case here. Aval, behar hamislaket yud mitoche. If it only reaches 10 tfachim after 5 amos and not 4, then mod domadi de yafe. There we do a full measuring of maktir v'olam, maktir v'yored. What?
Are you measured or you do the
Maktir.
steps?
We're maktir. We do the steps. That's what Rashi points out here. Rav Huna bereid Rav Nasan masni lekula. He taught an even bigger kula in our Mishnah. Amar Rav lo shanu ella behar hamislaket asar mitoch chamesh. When does our Mishnah say that your mavliya or koder, depending on the height here, that's only true when it's mitoch asar, when the slope is slightly lower. Aval behar hamislaket asar mitoch dalid om do veholechlo. There you can just approximate. What does that mean? How do you approximate? So that's a good question. We'd have to get into the meforshim here. And we'd have to figure it out, but it's a bigger kula because we don't require standard measurements. Halfway down, nun ches amud beit. Let's continue. Why can we not go way off the reservation, even though we haven't measured, or maybe we measured east to west and not north to south, whatever it is? But you can't be out of bounds. Why not? My taima amar Rav Kahana gzeira shem yomru midas tchumen ba'alakan. Maybe people will think you're able to carry there, and that's pashat not true. That's us, or not. Forget about carrying. That you're allowed to walk there. You're not allowed to walk that far because that's way outside the tchum. How do we do this mekadron, this parallel measurements? We've already spoken about it a number of times tonight. Tachton keneged libo, elyon keneged margalosav. You have two people. If I'm on the lower one, I hold it at my head, and you go up in front of me, and you hold it at your feet, and the line stays perfectly parallel to the ground. And then Amar Rabbi nikitinan ein mekadron el bechevel shel arba amos, like Hirsch was asking earlier, that we only have the dalet amos. It's a shorter rope that's only about 8 feet. And it assumes a certain slope, an angle of slope that you can actually do this, but that would be the way to measure it. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravua, ein mekadron lo be'egla arufa v'lo ba'arei miklat mipnei shehin shel Torah. We don't do this concept of mekadron by an egla arufa or by arei miklat mipnei shehin shel Torah. So we don't rely on this. This is deemed to be a kula in regards to tchumen, but we would not use it by dinei doraisa. So let's stop here. We'll pick up tomorrow night with Daf Nun Tes. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Yeah, you get that.
What is it? Oh, is that 32 minutes?